Mark had never expected to find himself in a place like Scifi. The planet was far from Earth, a world filled with strange alien species, vibrant landscapes, and customs that felt as alien as the beings that walked its surface. He was here on a routine diplomatic mission, tasked with establishing a peaceful alliance between Earth and the various inhabitants of the solar system. The Scifi people were known for their intelligence and their complex social structures, but nothing could have prepared Mark for the cultural shock he was about to face. The moment his ship landed on the rocky surface, Mark felt the weight of the unfamiliar world pressing against him. The air had a slight metallic scent, the sky a deep purple, and the ground beneath him shimmered with a strange, almost liquid quality. As he stepped off the shuttle, a group of Scifi natives awaited him. Their appearance was breathtaking. Tall, elegant, with glowing skin that shifted between soft hues of blue and silver, their eyes wide and bright. But it wasn't just their beauty that was striking. It was the power that emanated from them, a calm strength that made Mark feel both awe and trepidation. At the head of the group stood the eldest sister, Izora, a woman who carried herself with the kind of authority that spoke of generations of leadership. Her deep violet eyes scanned Mark, as if weighing him, her expression unreadable. By her side was Zora, the youngest of the 7 sisters, her delicate features contrasting with the strength in her stance. Zara was quiet, observing Mark with an air of curiosity. She was unlike the others, softer, more reserved, yet her presence was no less commanding. Mark wasn't sure what to expect from this encounter, but he knew one thing. The customs here were unlike anything he had encountered on Earth. "Welcome, human," as Zora said, her voice steady but with an underlying warmth. "We have been waiting for you." Mark smiled nervously, offering a hand in greeting, which Izora accepted with a firm grip. As he glanced over at the other sisters, his eyes briefly met Zora's. For a fleeting moment, he felt a strange pull, a sensation he couldn't explain. Her soft smile, though small, seemed to have a hidden depth. There was something about her that was different, but Mark couldn't put his finger on it. "You must be thirsty after your long journey," Zora said, her voice gentle but clear. "Let me offer you something to drink." Mark nodded, still trying to process the situation. He hadn't expected this warm welcome. It felt like he was stepping into a world that had been waiting for him, even though he had no idea what was coming next. Zara led him to a small courtyard where a fountain of blue liquid bubbled, casting a soft, calming glow in the fading light of the day. The other sisters stayed at a distance, quietly watching, but Zara remained close to Mark, offering him a drink. As they exchanged pleasantries, Zara's hand brushed against Mark's as he took the cup from her. The touch was light, almost innocent, but it sent a shock of warmth through him. For a moment, he felt a strange sense of connection with her, a bond he couldn't explain. "Thank you," Mark said, setting the cup down. He smiled again, though the unease in his chest hadn't fully dissipated. "I've heard a lot about your people. I look forward to learning more." Zara nodded but didn't say anything else. Instead, she studied him, her gaze intense. Mark felt his words falter under her scrutiny. The air seemed to thicken between them, and before he could think of anything else to say, Zara stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Without any warning, Zara's lips met his in a soft kiss. Mark was too stunned to pull away, his mind racing as he realized what had just happened. The kiss lasted only a moment, but in that brief instant, it felt as if the world had shifted. When Zara pulled away, she was flushed, her eyes wide with surprise. Or was it something else? Mark stood frozen, unsure of what had just transpired. Was this part of the customs? Was this a greeting? He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Before he could say anything, the air around them shifted. The other sisters had moved in closer, their expressions hard to read, but Mark could feel the tension building. Izora stepped forward, her gaze sharp as a blade. "What have you done, Zara?" Izora's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Zora's gaze flickered to Mark, then back to her older sister. I did not mean to cause harm, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Zora's eyes narrowed, and she glanced at the other sisters. They exchanged silent looks, and Mark could feel their collective gaze on him. A strange chill ran down his spine. This is no simple mistake, Zora continued, her tone unwavering. The law of Solera 5 is clear. You, human, have kissed our youngest sister. By the ancient laws of our Piup. Law, this means you must marry all 7 of us. Mark's heart skipped a beat as the full weight of Zora's words sank in. He looked around at the sisters, all of them staring at him with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. Zora's face was flushed, but her expression was unreadable. The other sisters remained silent, their gazes fixed on him. Wait, what? Mark managed to stammer, his mind racing. Marry all of you. I don't even know you. The sisters stood in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Mark could feel the pressure building around him, the weight of this strange, alien law pressing down on his shoulders. Zora stepped forward again, her gaze soft but firm. It is the law, Zora said quietly, and you have no choice but to accept it. Mark's mind raced. This was madness. He had kissed Zora out of an innocent misunderstanding, and now he was bound to a life he didn't understand with people he barely knew. He glanced at the sisters, each one looking at him with a mixture of expectation and curiosity. Was this really happening? Before he could process any more, Zora spoke again. You have 3 days, human, she said, her voice sharp and commanding. 3 days to decide. If you refuse, it will not only insult our family but could spark an intergalactic conflict. Choose wisely. Mark's breath caught in his throat. What had he gotten himself into? Mark sat in stunned silence, still trying to process the situation. The kiss had been accidental, a simple misunderstanding of cultural norms. But now, it seemed to have bound him to a strange and ancient law of Solera 5. The law was clear. By kissing the youngest sister, Zora, he was now obligated to marry all 7 of them. The realization hit him hard, and his mind spun with the implications. Zora, the eldest sister, stood before him with an air of authority, her violet eyes sharp and calculating. The other sisters remained silent, watching him with unreadable expressions. Zora, the youngest, stood a few steps behind her sisters, her gaze downcast, avoiding his eyes. Mark felt the weight of their collective stare, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on beneath the surface. Marry all of you, Mark repeated, his voice shaking slightly. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. This was insane. He had come here to establish peaceful relations between Earth and the Solera 5 people, not to get caught up in a bizarre marriage contract. Yes, Zora said, her voice steady and unwavering. It is the law of our people. The youngest must be kissed by the one who will marry her, and by extension, marry all of us. Mark ran a hand through his hair, trying to gather his thoughts. He had heard about the customs of Solera 5, but nothing in his training had prepared him for something like this. The laws of this planet were unlike anything he had encountered in his diplomatic career. He wasn't sure what to do next. He glanced at Zora, who still wouldn't meet his gaze. I don't understand, Mark said slowly. Why? Why does the law work like this? Zora stepped forward, her expression softening just a fraction. Our people value unity, she said. When a bond is formed, it is meant to be unbreakable. The kiss you shared with Zora has already sealed the agreement. It cannot be undone. Mark blinked, trying to process her words. But I don't even know you, any of you. He protested. I didn't mean for this to happen. I know, Zora replied. But the law is not something that can be easily broken. It has existed for as long as our people have. Mark's mind raced, the pressure of the situation mounting. He had come to this planet as a diplomat, to foster peaceful relations. Now he was caught in the middle of a centuries-old law that forced him into something he didn't understand, let alone want. His heart raced as he tried to think of a way out of this mess. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Isora's expression hardened. "If you refuse, it would be seen as a great insult to our family and our people. Such a refusal would cause a rift between our two worlds. It would be considered an offense, one that would not be taken lightly." Mark felt the weight of her words settle heavily on his shoulders. His refusal wouldn't just be a personal matter. It could affect the future of Earth's relationship with Solara 5. He had no idea how to navigate this, but the stakes were high. 3 days, Isora continued, her voice colder now. "You have 3 days to make your decision. If you choose to marry us, you will join our family, and in return, we will offer our alliance to Earth. But if you refuse, the consequences will be severe." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The pressure was unbearable. He wasn't just facing a family dilemma. He was caught in the middle of something far bigger than himself. He had to find a way out. But how? He looked at Zara, who still stood quietly at the back of the group, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He had kissed her, yes, but she didn't look happy about the situation either. Her gaze was distant, and Mark could sense that she, too, felt trapped by the law. "I didn't want this," Mark said softly, looking at Zara. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Zara finally lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and uncertainty. She stepped forward hesitantly, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for you to get caught in this either. But the law, it's not something we can change." Mark felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was as much a victim of this ancient tradition as he was. He could see that Zara was not the one forcing him into this. She looked conflicted, as if she, too, wished there were another way. "I never intended for any of this to happen," Mark said, his voice quieter now, the frustration in his chest building. "But there has to be a way out. There must be another solution." Isora's sharp eyes never left him. "You will find none. The law is clear. There is no other way. You will marry us all, or you will refuse and face the consequences." Mark's heart sank. There was no easy way out of this. He was being forced into a situation that went against everything he believed in. He had no desire to marry 7 women, let alone be bound by a law that he didn't understand. Yet, if he refused, it could destroy the fragile peace between Earth and Solara 5. He glanced back at Zara, who was still watching him, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and something else, something that almost looked like hope. "I'll need time," Mark said, his voice thick with the weight of the decision he faced. "I can't make a decision like this in a few minutes." Isora nodded slowly. "You have 3 days. After that, the decision will be final." With that, the sisters turned and began to walk away, leaving Mark alone in the courtyard with his thoughts. The weight of the decision hung heavy on his mind. He had 3 days to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. He knew one thing for sure: he couldn't do this alone. He needed to understand more about the sisters, about the law, and most importantly, about the person Zara truly was. As the last of the sisters disappeared into the distance, Mark felt a sense of dread settle in his chest. He had 3 days. 3 days to make a decision that could change the course of his life forever. The next few days were a blur for Mark. Every moment felt like he was walking deeper into a labyrinth, unsure of which direction to turn. Isora had left him with the weight of the decision, and now he found himself in a world that seemed to operate under rules he could barely comprehend. The law of Solara 5 was ancient and unyielding. Mark knew that refusing the marriage would have serious consequences, not just for him, but for Earth's future relations with this strange alien world. He needed answers, and there was no one else to turn to but the 7 sisters. The next morning, Mark was invited to join the sisters for a tour of their home. The grand building they inhabited was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a mix of organic design, with flowing curves and structures that seemed to grow out of the ground itself. The walls shimmered with a silvery hue, and the air felt alive, almost as if the house itself was breathing. Zara, the youngest, had taken the lead for the tour. Mark noticed how different she was from the others. Where Isora exuded authority and strength, Zara was more reserved, almost shy in her demeanor. Yet there was an underlying power in her presence, a quiet strength that intrigued him. As she led him through the hallways, Mark couldn't help but notice how the other sisters watched him closely, their eyes following his every movement. "Don't mind them," Zara said, her voice soft as they walked through a hallway lined with strange symbols. "They're protective of me. They've always been that way." Mark nodded, trying to make sense of everything. "I don't understand. This law, why is it so important? What happens if I refuse?" Zara paused, her gaze flickering with a mixture of sadness and something deeper, regret perhaps. "It's not just about the law. It's about our history, our people. When a bond is formed with the youngest, it's seen as a way to bring the family together. For centuries, the eldest sister would choose a mate, but the law changed. Now, it's the youngest who carries the responsibility of ensuring the family's unity." Mark frowned. "But why marry all of you? Why not just Zara?" Zara's eyes softened as she looked at him. "The law requires a bond with all 7 sisters. It's the only way to keep the balance within the family. Each sister has a unique power, and together, we are stronger. The union between the 7 of us symbolizes our strength as a whole." Mark absorbed her words, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him even harder. This wasn't just about one kiss. It was about something much deeper. He could sense that Zara was conflicted about the law herself. She didn't seem thrilled by the idea of marriage either. The tour continued, and as they walked, Mark learned more about each of the sisters and their unique abilities. Each one had a skill that set her apart. Naya, the eldest, was a skilled fighter, her physical prowess unmatched by any in their society. Ara, the second sister, had a gift for diplomacy and negotiation. Her words could convince even the most stubborn of leaders. Each sister played a role, and it was clear that they were all very different, yet bound together by the same ancient law. Later, after the tour, Mark was invited to sit with the sisters in a grand dining hall. The atmosphere was tense, but as the meal progressed, Mark began to relax. He could see that despite the law that bound them, the sisters were still individuals with their own dreams and desires. They were not simply figures in an ancient tradition. They were people with emotions, hopes, and fears. Isora, who had been quiet during most of the meal, finally spoke up. Her voice was calm but firm. "We are not asking you to make a decision in haste. We understand that this law is difficult to accept, but it is part of who we are. The unity of our family is what has kept us strong throughout the ages." Mark nodded slowly, still processing everything. "But I'm not part of your family. I'm from Earth. I'm just here to help with the peace talks. This isn't what I signed up for." The sisters looked at each other, a quiet understanding passing between them. Zara spoke softly. "I know it's not what you expected, but what we have here is something unique. We've been together for so long, and the law is part of our culture. It's difficult for us too." Mark's gaze softened as he looked at Zara. He could see that she wasn't like the others. She didn't seem as eager for the marriage, and her eyes told a story of someone who had been caught in the web of tradition, unsure how to escape it. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Mark said, his voice sincere. "I didn't know. I didn't understand your customs." Zora met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "No one ever really does. But sometimes we have to face things that are out of our control. This is one of those times." Mark felt a tug in his chest. Despite the confusion and pressure, there was something undeniably magnetic about Zora. He had kissed her, yes, but it was more than that. There was a bond forming between them, something that neither of them had expected. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he couldn't ignore the connection he felt. Isora broke the silence with a slight smile, though it was laced with seriousness. We understand your hesitation. But understand this, if you decide to refuse, there will be consequences. Not just for you, but for your planet as well. Mark leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had to make a choice, and quickly. But how could he possibly make such a decision? He had barely known these people for a day, and now he was being asked to marry all of them. The weight of it was overwhelming. I need more time, Mark said, his voice firm. I need to understand more about you all. About this family. I can't make a decision without knowing what I'm getting into. Isora's eyes softened, and for the first time, Mark saw a hint of compassion in her gaze. You have 3 days, Mark. But remember, each sister is unique. Their powers are tied to their emotions. Understand them, and you will understand the law. Mark nodded, feeling the pressure mount even higher. His 3 days were ticking away, and the more he learned, the more complicated things became. There was no simple answer, no easy escape. But one thing was certain, his decision would shape the future of Earth's relationship with Solara 5. As the meal came to a close, Zara stood and walked toward Mark. I know this isn't easy, but whatever happens, I want you to know that I never wanted this for you. I didn't mean to drag you into our loss. But now that you're here, we all have to make choices. Mark stood as well, his heart heavy with the weight of his situation. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his planet's future, and for the possibility of a future with Zora. But that future seemed uncertain, clouded by the ancient laws that neither he nor Zora could escape. Mark woke early the next morning, his mind still reeling from everything he had learned the day before. The weight of the decision ahead of him pressed on his shoulders like a heavy stone. 3 days. He had 3 days to decide whether to accept the ancient law of the Solara 5 people and marry all 7 sisters or refuse and risk an intergalactic crisis. The clock was ticking, and Mark knew that he couldn't make this decision lightly. He had spent the previous evening alone, pacing the halls of his guest quarters, turning over the situation in his mind again and again. He had come to Solara 5 with one goal: to help broker peace between Earth and the various alien species in the galaxy. Now his mission had taken an unexpected and deeply personal turn. He was caught in a web of tradition, one that seemed as old as the planet itself, and he had no idea how to escape it. As he sat down to breakfast, Mark was joined by Zora. She sat across from him, her expression quiet and thoughtful. She had been different the night before, more open, more willing to talk. But now she seemed distant again, as if the weight of the situation had settled on her shoulders as well. How are you feeling? Zara asked, her voice soft but sincere. About everything, I mean. Mark looked at her, feeling the weight of the question. How could he possibly explain what he was feeling? I don't know, he admitted. I'm confused. I didn't come here expecting any of this. I don't know what to do. I don't want to cause trouble, but at the same time, it's too much. Zara nodded, her eyes looking far away. I understand. I didn't want any of this either. I didn't want to be part of the law, and I certainly didn't want to drag you into it. But it's something we have to follow, and once the bond is made, there's no turning back. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't want to be forced into something. I didn't come here to marry anyone, let alone 7 sisters. I didn't mean to break any laws, but it feels like I'm stuck in a situation I can't control. Zora's eyes softened as she looked at him. I didn't mean for this to happen. But now that it has, I don't want to see you suffer. You have to understand, Mark. The law isn't just about marriage. It's about the unity of our family. We've been following it for generations. It's how we've stayed strong. Mark studied her, his mind still racing. I get that, he said, his voice low. But what if I don't agree with it? What if I don't want to marry all of you? What happens then? Zora looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her sleeve. If you refuse, There will be consequences, she said quietly. Not just for you, but for Earth too. The law is a part of who we are, and breaking it would create a rift between our worlds. It would ruin any chance of peace between our... Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. So if I refuse, it could mean war. Zara didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be searching for the right words, her brow furrowed. Not war, exactly. But it would be a huge insult. Our people are proud of their traditions, and they would never forgive someone who disrespected them. I don't think anyone would want that, least of all me. Mark felt a pang of guilt. Zara seemed to be caught in this just as much as he was. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the weight of responsibility that had been thrust upon her. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't make a decision out of fear of offending anyone. He had to think about what was right for him, and what was right for Earth. I don't know how to do this, Mark admitted. I don't know how to navigate these customs, and I don't want to hurt anyone. Zara leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You're not hurting anyone by being honest with yourself. If you don't want this, you have to say it. I know it's not easy, but the law is not more important than how you feel. Mark paused, considering her words. He had been so focused on the potential fallout that he hadn't stopped to think about what he wanted. What did he truly want? He didn't want to be forced into a marriage, especially not one that involved 7 women, each of them with their own personalities and expectations. It wasn't just about him. It was about the future, about how the humans and the Scifi people would coexist. But as he looked at Zara, he realized that he couldn't ignore the connection that had formed between them. Despite the chaos and confusion, he couldn't deny that something had changed between them. There was an undeniable bond, one that felt deeper than just the law that had brought them together. But could he accept it? Zara, Mark said slowly, I don't know if I can marry all of you. I don't know if I can be a part of this tradition. But I can't deny that there's something here between us. Zara's eyes softened, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I understand. I don't expect you to marry all of us, Mark. But I do think we should figure this out together. I don't want to make this harder for you. Mark nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. I appreciate that. I don't want to make things difficult for anyone either. But I need to think. I need to figure out what's best for Earth, for Scifi, and for me. The weight of the decision was still heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time since arriving on Scifi, Mark felt like he wasn't facing it alone. Zara's presence, her understanding, gave him the clarity he needed. He wasn't alone in this dilemma, and that made all the difference. The third day arrived far too quickly for Mark. He had spent the past few days weighed down by his thoughts, caught between the pressure of tradition and the moral dilemma of what he felt was right. The time to make a decision was now upon him, and as he looked out across the vast landscape of Scifi, he realized how little he understood about the culture he was being thrust into. Despite the confusion and uncertainty, one thing was clear. He couldn't make a decision just because of the law. He needed a solution, something that could benefit both Earth and the Scifi people without sacrificing his own values. Mark knew he couldn't marry all 7 sisters. He couldn't even imagine it. But the consequences of refusing the law were dire, and he wasn't about to risk causing a rift between their worlds. His mind raced with possibilities as he walked toward the grand hall where the sisters had gathered. It was time to present an idea, one that might allow him to avoid the marriage while still honoring the law in some way. As he entered the hall, the sisters were already seated, their gazes trained on him. Zara sat to the side, her face unreadable, though her eyes softened when she saw him approach. Zora, the eldest, stood at the head of the table, her eyes sharp and calculating, waiting for Mark to speak. The rest of the sisters remained silent, their expressions hard to read. I've thought a lot about this, Mark began, his voice steady but filled with tension. And I know the law is important to your people. I understand that. But I can't marry all of you. It's not something I can do. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Mark could see the mixture of disappointment and concern in their eyes, but he pressed on, determined to find a solution. However, he continued, I think I have another way. A way that can honor your traditions without forcing me into something I'm not ready for. What if, instead of a marriage, I propose an alliance? The sisters exchanged curious glances, and for a moment, Mark wasn't sure if his idea would be accepted. But he knew this was his chance, the only chance to change the course of the situation. I'm here to build a relationship between Earth and Scifi, Mark explained. I came to negotiate peace, to establish an alliance for the future. The kiss. That was a mistake, but it's already happened, and it can't be undone. What if, instead of marriage, I become a diplomatic partner in this alliance? We can work together, using the strengths of each of your family members to create a bond that benefits both our people. Asora's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no immediate anger, only curiosity. You would offer an alliance, but not marry us? She asked, her voice calm but firm. What makes you think such a solution would work? Mark took a deep breath. Because an alliance doesn't require a union in the traditional sense. It's a partnership. I would still honor your family, work with you all, and ensure that Earth and Scifi can move forward together. I can still help broker peace, and in return, you will have the human support you need for future endeavors. We don't need to be bound by marriage to do that. Zara, who had been silent up until now, looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and skepticism. But what about the law? What about the unity of our family? Mark looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. I understand the law is important, Zora, but we live in a different time. I want to respect your traditions, but we also need to think about what's best for everyone. An alliance can provide the same unity, without forcing anyone into a situation they're not comfortable with. Isora stood, her posture regal and unyielding. She walked toward Mark, her eyes scanning his face. Mark stood tall, trying to meet her gaze without faltering. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity, but then Isora spoke. Your proposal is unexpected, she said, her voice thoughtful. An alliance would offer the benefit of peace and cooperation, something our people have long desired. But it is not something that can be easily accepted. It would require trust from both sides, and your people would need to accept it as well. Mark nodded. I'm willing to work with you. I'm not asking for an easy solution. I'm asking for a chance to prove that this partnership can be just as valuable as a marriage. The room fell quiet again, the tension palpable. The sisters seemed to be weighing his words, considering the possibility of an alternative to the law they had followed for so long. After a long pause, Isora turned to the other sisters. They exchanged looks, communicating without words, and then she turned back to Mark. We will consider your proposal, Isora said slowly. But know this, human, this is not something we can take lightly. The law is centuries old, and many in our society would not accept anything less than the full marriage. You will have to prove to us, and to our people, that this alliance is worth more than the law. Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was his chance. He couldn't afford to back down now. I'll do whatever it takes, he said firmly. I'm committed to making this work. I'll prove that this alliance is valuable, and if it means working harder, I'll do that too. Zara stood then, stepping forward to stand beside him. Her gaze was soft, but there was determination in her eyes. I believe you, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I don't want to be part of a law that forces anyone into something they don't want, but I also want what's best for my people. If an alliance is the way forward, I'm willing to help make it happen. Isora studied her for a long moment before nodding. We will discuss this further, she said, her voice still firm. But know this, if this alliance is to work, you must prove your worth, not just to us, but to the people of Scifi. The future of our worlds depends on it. Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was far from over, but it was the first step toward a solution. The alliance he had proposed might just be the way forward, and for the first time since stepping onto Solara 5, he felt like he might be able to carve out a path that worked for everyone involved. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Mark's proposal for an alliance had been received with mixed reactions. Izora, the eldest sister, had agreed to consider it, but the weight of the decision was not just in her hands. The people of Solara 5 had their own customs, their own laws, and many were deeply entrenched in the belief that the law of the Seven Sisters could never be compromised. Mark had spent the past 2 days in meetings with various leaders of Solara 5, trying to convince them that an alliance would be better for both their people and Earth. Some were open to the idea, intrigued by the potential for cooperation, but others were resistant, clinging to the old traditions. There were murmurs of rebellion in the air, doubts about whether a partnership between their world and Earth could truly work without the bond of marriage. Throughout all of this, Zara had remained by Mark's side. Her presence was a constant comfort, but it also reminded him of the complexity of the situation. She was part of the law that had brought him here, but she was also caught in the same web of tradition. Mark knew she had her own struggles with the situation, though she never spoke of them. He could see it in the way she looked at him sometimes, with an expression of quiet sadness and confusion. One evening, as Mark was walking through the gardens of the palace, Zora approached him. Her footsteps were soft on the grass, and for a moment, he didn't notice she was there until he felt the gentle brush of her presence. "Mark," she said softly, her voice quiet but urgent. "I need to talk to you." Mark turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this moment was coming, but he wasn't sure how to respond. "Zara," he said, his voice low, "we don't have much time left. I know what the council is saying. I'm trying, but I don't know if this will work. The law is so deeply rooted in your people. The alliance, it might not be enough." Zora's expression softened. She looked at him for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "I know," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I've been thinking a lot about this, about what you said, about the alliance. And I want to believe it can work. I want to believe that there's a way for all of us to move forward, without the marriage, without the law forcing you into something you don't want." Mark's heart clenched as he looked at her. Her honesty, her vulnerability, only made the decision harder. He had never wanted to hurt her, but the reality was that no matter how much he cared for her, the stakes were too high. He couldn't bind himself to something that wasn't his choice. He needed to think about Earth's future and the people he was representing. "I don't want to hurt anyone either," Mark said quietly, his voice full of uncertainty. "I came here to help both our worlds. I never imagined that it would come to this, that I'd be put in a position where I have to make a choice that could change everything." Zara stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "I know it's not fair," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But this law, it's not just about tradition. It's about family. It's about keeping us strong. The unity of the Seven Sisters has been the foundation of our people's strength for centuries. Without it, we risk losing everything. The unity that you would offer in an alliance, Mark, it might be the key to our survival." Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about Earth. Zora was right. There was more at stake here. The law, for all its faults, had been the pillar of Solara 5's society. The sisters were bound by it, and if he chose to refuse it, it could tear apart everything they had worked for. But could he really agree to something he didn't believe in? Could he marry all 7 of them when his heart wasn't in it? The thought made him feel trapped, suffocated by the pressure of the tradition and the fear of disappointing both his own people and the Solara 5 family. "I don't know what to do," Mark admitted, his voice quiet but filled with raw honesty. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to break your family. But I also can't ignore what feels right for me. I don't want to be forced into something I don't believe in." Zara reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but it held an unspoken understanding between them. "I know," she said softly. "I know you're struggling, Mark. And I don't want you to feel like you have to do this for me, or for anyone. But whatever happens, I want you to know that I understand. This isn't just about you or me. It's about all of us, and the future we can build together." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, thick with the weight of their unspoken emotions. Mark felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thought that perhaps there was a way forward that didn't involve sacrificing everything he believed in. "I'll do whatever it takes," Mark said finally, his voice steady with resolve. "But I need time. I need to think about the future, not just for us, but for both our worlds. I need to make a choice that's right for everyone, not just what's easiest." Zara nodded, her expression softening. "I'll give you the time you need," she said quietly. "But remember, no matter what you decide, we will always find a way forward, together." Mark felt a sense of relief wash over him. No matter what decision he made, he wouldn't be alone in it. Zara was with him, standing by his side, and that made all the difference. As the evening sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden, Mark realized that the choice he was about to make would not just affect his life, but the lives of everyone on both Earth and Solaria 5. It was a choice that would determine the future of their people, the future of their worlds, and it was one he couldn't take lightly. The third day arrived with the heavy weight of decision pressing on Mark's chest. The future of Earth's relationship with Solaria 5, and perhaps even the stability of the galaxy, hung in the balance. Mark had spent the last 2 days deeply immersed in his thoughts, going over every detail of his situation. The stakes were higher than he had ever anticipated, and now he had to decide what path to take. He sat alone in his guest quarters, staring out at the vast alien landscape beyond the palace's windows. The purple sky of Solaria 5 stretched out endlessly, and the strange shimmering surfaces of the buildings below seemed almost to pulse with life. It was a beautiful world, but the beauty only made his dilemma harder. Everything about this place, from the law to the customs, felt so foreign to him. And yet, here he was, caught in the middle of it all. Mark had thought long and hard about the proposal he put forward, the alliance that could bind their two worlds without forcing him into the binding marriage required by the law. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that his proposal was the only way forward, not just for him, but for Zara and her sisters as well. This was a family who had lived by these laws for generations, and they could not be expected to throw it all away. Yet Mark knew they were also willing to change, if given a chance to see the potential benefits of a different path. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Zara, about the sisters, and about the future they could build together. He couldn't deny the growing bond between him and Zara, but he also understood that their bond could not be forced into a mold dictated by law. There had to be another way, a way that would bring them all together without sacrificing their individual freedoms. He stood up and walked toward the door, his heart beating faster. It was time to face them. There was no more running, no more waiting. The time had come to make the choice. Mark made his way through the palace halls, his footsteps echoing in the quiet corridors. He reached the grand hall where the sisters had gathered. Izora, as always, stood at the head of the table, her commanding presence filling the room. The other sisters sat around her, each one watching him with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. Zara, as usual, sat slightly to the side, her eyes locked on him. "Mark," Izora said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "The time has come. We are waiting for your decision." Mark took a deep breath. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about their future, his, Zara's, the sisters, and the future of both Earth and Solaria 5. He couldn't pretend to have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't be forced into a decision that wasn't his own. He had to do what was right for everyone involved. "I thought long and hard about this," Mark began, his voice steady. I know the importance of your traditions, and I respect them. But I can't marry all of you. It's not something I can do. I came here to build a partnership, not to be bound by something I don't believe in. I want to help you, and I want to help my people, but we need a new way forward." He paused, glancing at Zara, who was watching him intently. Her expression was soft, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "That's why I'm here today, to offer an alliance between Earth and Solera 5. Mark continued, his tone firm. "Not a marriage, not a law that binds us, but a partnership based on trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. We can work together, using our strengths to help both our worlds. We can be allies, not bound by a law that forces anyone into something they don't want." Isora's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression unreadable. The other sisters were silent, their eyes flickering with a mix of emotions. Zara, however, stood up and walked toward Mark, her eyes never leaving his. "I agree with Mark," Zara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. "I don't want to be part of a law that forces anyone into something they don't want. I want to build a future where we can work together, not because the law says so, but because it's what's best for everyone." Mark's heart swelled with gratitude as he looked at Zara. She had never been more clear in her intentions. It was a moment of understanding between them, and he could see that she truly believed in the future he was proposing. Isora glanced around the room at her sisters, who were all silent, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she nodded, her gaze returning to Mark. "You have given us something to consider," she said slowly. "Your words are not taken lightly, Mark, and the proposal you offer is unexpected. But you are right. The law has guided us for generations, but it is not the only way. An alliance could bring our two worlds together in a way that honors both our traditions and your people's needs. It will not be easy, but it is possible." Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew the road ahead would not be simple. The Solera 5 people had deep roots in their customs, and changing them would take time. But this was a step in the right direction. "I am willing to try," Isora continued, "but the process will not be quick. You will have to prove to our people that this alliance is worth more than the old ways, that the future we build together is more important than the laws that have bound us for so long." Mark nodded. "I understand. I'm not asking for everything to change overnight, but I believe we can build something that works for both our peoples." The sisters nodded in agreement, and for the first time, the atmosphere in the room shifted from one of tension to one of cautious optimism. They weren't just agreeing to Mark's proposal, they were opening the door to a new future, one where the law wasn't the only force that governed their lives. Zara smiled at Mark, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for believing in us." Mark smiled back, feeling the weight of the decision lift from his shoulders. It wasn't the easy way out, but it was the right one. And it was a new beginning, not just for him and Zara, but for both their worlds. As he left the room, Mark felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt before. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since arriving on Solera 5, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The journey ahead would be challenging, but it was one he was ready to face, with Zara by his side and the hope of a new future for both Earth and Solera 5 in his heart.